G'day folks. Today's video is in two parts. Firstly, we'll look at fine-tuning HLG 2 and HLG 3 and how best to grade that in Adobe Premiere Pro. And then secondly, we're going to take a look at dealing with footage that looks washed out in Quicktime in your export when compared to viewing it in the Adobe Premiere Pro project window. Now the last part is actually for all cameras when using Premiere Pro and comparing it to Quicktime, not just shots recorded in Sony HLG. I'll put a link in the description below if you'd like to jump to that part if needed, but first, HLG. So these shots in my backyard, they're not the best shots in the world, and that's the whole point of when I want to use HLG. So in these kind of shots, this is like almost a worst case scenario when you've got a strong backlight and not much light on the subject or in the foreground. And those are the kind of shots where I choose to use HLG just to try to get the best dynamic range possible. Now I've gone through all the settings in the camera, all the HLG settings, and I've come up with what I think is the best settings to use, and the end goal is not having to do too much in post. So that way, you'll get the best skin tones, especially when you're shooting with a color mode set to Rec 709 as opposed to anything else like your BT 2020 and especially S-Log. Alright, so let's look at our first shot here. To help make this video shorter, I'll actually put my picture profile settings either on the screen or in the description box below. That way you can check it out. But I'll talk about exposure. This is HLG 3, this shot. And I had my zebras set to 100 plus, which is perfect for HLG 3. If it's HLG 2, you'll need to set that to 95 plus. And to start with, when I'm exposing for a difficult shot like this, I just want to have a look at the sky and decide how much can I fit into the shot without darkening the skin too much. And in this one, we've gone with just a little bit of zebras showing up on the tips of those clouds there. So from that point, I eyeball the shot. And the viewfinder is good in the A7 III, maybe not the LCD, but in the viewfinder, I just kind of eyeball and figure out what's a acceptable level for the skin tone. And I go back and forth just quickly to see if I need to brighten it or not. And like I said, that just peaked out a little bit on the zebras at 100 plus. So after that, I brought it into Premiere, and the first thing I did was just darken the sky a little bit here. And I'll quickly show you what I did. And once again, I won't go into too much detail, but I'll just say quickly, I grabbed the blues, all the blues in the curve rollout, added saturation, darkened it a little bit, and maybe this is overkill or not, but I also picked a color out of there and did the same. Added a bit of blue and darkened the shot. Now that is masked then, just over this area here. I can zoom out a bit to help you see it. And as well as that mask being there, I've just keyed it on and off, so that's off there and back on again when we zoom out. So pretty simple, that's the sky. And that node is first, so that it's calculated first. Then after that, we have our regular node. You can see the difference there. Basically just pulled up the shadows. But I'll have another quick look in here. In the basic rollout, you can see I haven't changed that much. And I've added a bit of saturation to compensate for my picture profile, having -4 in saturation there, just to bring it back. Bit of sharpness, and you can see the gamma. So that's the second thing in the calculating queue, works top down. And the last one here is an adjustment layer. So these are from LUTs, from a website called Lutify Me, which I found ages ago, and still I like it to this day. I haven't had a reason to look for any more. So that, plus the inbuilt ones, is what I've been using. I'll go through some of those shortly, but for now, what I want to show is the order of operations. So it'll work top down, it'll do the sky mask, then it'll do my regular grade, and then this adjustment layer will be calculated last. And that's on about 80%, and that one's called Herderite. It's under creative, there we are, heard it right, on 80%. And by the way, a LUT is a good way to uniform and unify all your shots and make it look like it's from the same universe, I guess. And it also makes it look less video-like. And anything that makes it head towards being cinematic helps. My fave choices currently are ones that aren't too aggressive. And in fact, here are my 4 faves. So heard alright, which we've looked at, which is from Lutify Me, and that's at about 80%. And you can see it doesn't, if I turn it on and off, it's not too aggressive, but it definitely takes it away from the full color palette, which will look more video-like in my opinion. And then we have one that actually does color the shot, which is a teal and orange LUT called, let's have a look, Huel and Diet, and that's at about 70%. And that's one of my favorites. So those are 2 Lutify Me ones, and these 2 are just off the shelf in Premiere Pro's Lumetri. And this one is the Fuji Real 500D, and that's a subtle one once again. And the same with this codec 5205, which is my other favorite off the shelf, and that's at about 70% as well. And pretty much the same, doesn't color it too much. You can see it desaturating the greens and the magentas, but not the teal and orange, and blue and reds. So those are my 4 favorite LUTs. I can pretty much achieve everything I want to with those, unless I want to go something really crazy, like black and white or something. Okay, so once I've done that, put the LUT on last as the last order of operations. Then of course we go to our export settings. Now, because this was a bit delicate, this shot, I actually shot this at 60 megabits per second, not 100, and I'm not sure if that would have helped me much in the case of where it was most delicate, and where the shot broke the most was when she was moving. I noticed at my usual export settings, I was getting some artifacts. So I found when I bumped it up to at least 50 megabits per second with a couple of passes, rather than my usual 25 megabits per second for 4K, then that fixed it, and I'll show my results. That actually fixed the blocky, we'll call them compression artifacts. I heard some people call it noise, and it's actually not noise. The compression artifacts look a bit different to noise. Alright, that's pretty much it for my HLG settings. Like I said, just to keep it short, and if I missed anything, you should be able to pause the video and look at some of the settings here, and otherwise I'll leave it in the description below. Actually, before I talk about the next topic, I just want to show a couple more examples of HLG 3 compared to HLG 2, which is that one. I'll change the color of it. So the green one there is HLG 2, and I think you'll agree there's not much difference there. Now technically, the 2 main differences between HLG 3 and HLG 2 is on HLG 3 the lowest ISO you can go is 125, and HLG 2 you can go down to 100. Now you're going to lose the top 4 or 5% of your dynamic range, which is why we set our zebras to 95 plus for HLG 2, and it's back to normal 100 plus for HLG 3. So you can see you're giving one thing up for the other, and that's totally up to you. I prefer to get the full, well, not the full dynamic range, I prefer the other way. I prefer to get my ISO down to 100 so that I can reduce my shutter speed as much as possible. And in the real world, I think all you're talking about really here is if that cloud was brighter, we could have exposed that shot a tiny bit more, and I'm talking about your last 4 or 5%. So HLG 3 arguably could squeeze a tiny bit more dynamic range in, and I've tried to make both of these shots work, and as you can see, they're very similar. So practically, we're talking about a negligible difference, and arguably you could say, well, maybe a tiny bit brighter on the cloud there, and that's just about it. Now the manual says HLG 2 has a little bit of noise reduction, and You actually won't see that in a shot this bright. It's only when you really need it, it'll kick in. There's no way to adjust the settings of that, but it'll be in a more low light, high ISO situation. And that doesn't matter for me because I don't use HLG in low light anyway. I just use the picture profile off. So it really is splitting hairs then, because you won't see the noise reduction. Now I've got another example here. It's another trampoline shot, and we've gone back the following day, and this is HLG 2, and the lighting is different, but I've tried to make the grade the same, where you can see I've tried to add a bit of clouds in the background using the same technique. So turn off the clouds, the same mask. And it was a bit more of a tricky day, I think because the lighting was directly overhead, so it was less even. So as well as my regular grade, I've actually also added a little bit of a mid. You'll see here, just using this area, just brightened up the middle bit a little bit more. Not the mids, I've brightened the middle of the shot, as well as brighten the mids and lift the shadows and the overall exposure of this shot. So I've done a couple of those, HLG2, and I expected it to look a little bit cleaner, but that's when I realized, oh yeah, it's not adding the noise reduction until you get into high ISOs. But still a very nice shot. And for this adjustment layer, I have chosen my favorite Hue-and-Light at 70%. Okay, now that's all about HLG2. We'll go on to the next part. Do you like listening to rants from a jaded wedding videographer? Do you like YouTube? Do you like subscribing to random people on YouTube? Well, you've come to the right place. There's an awesome subscribe button right down there for you to smash. I can even throw in some handy videography tips. Subscribe now and all your worries will just melt away. Disclaimer that subscribing below does not even mean I will come up with any good content in the future at all. Okay, now the second part of this video, and it's a bit tricky to explain, but I'll try my best. If you're on a Mac like me, you may have encountered the problem where the export viewed in QuickTime doesn't look like your Adobe Premiere Pro project. You can see here that it looks more washed out and desaturated. Well, I hope you can tell from the QuickTime capture. I actually noticed this doing this particular project because this shot in particular was quite a fragile shot. Like I said, it was in 60 megabits per second, and the dynamic range was quite a balance, and then the colors itself had to be quite subtly graded, otherwise it quickly went out of whack. And that's why I really noticed when I exported my video that I'm like, hang on a minute, here comes that QuickTime washed out problem again. So you may have seen it, or if you're grading quite aggressively or using crazy LUTs, you may not have noticed, but it has been there. Okay, looking at a different shot here, or a different part of the shot, I think the main problem we're dealing with is that you can see here on two different apps, this is QuickTime, and that's the more washed out one. But in VLC, if we don't do anything else to the shot, and we're not trying to solve the problem yet, you can see here in VLC it looks much closer. And I won't go into too much detail as to why this happens, but I will leave some research down below for you to check out for yourself, because there's already a video or two out there explaining what probably the main solution is, and that is the QT compensation cube that you can download from Adobe. Just quickly, I did try to use that solution, and I think I've found a better way. And the problem with adding that LUT to your export effects tab is you have to work with the display color management on, and all those color profiles that it reads off your system makes the shot go much darker in your project. So when you turn this color display on, it does go much darker. So then you have to grade to compensate for that. And then after that, you do your normal grading as your last step. And then obviously once you add the LUT, when you export, it's supposed to do that final step of matching this to your QuickTime. And the bad thing about that is you don't even know that that's going to work until you export. And its main goal is to make QuickTime look more like that. But then you still have your other problems, like you don't know how each app is going to handle colors. So my recommendation is try to make your project look somewhere in the middle between these two extremes. And that way there's no nasty surprises later on down the line when you upload it to YouTube. The solution listed below tries to only solve one of those issues, which is the QuickTime one. But then it would look worse in VLC. And I like using VLC and QuickTime. I like using those two apps as my two extremes. I don't have an external monitor, so I use my scopes and these two apps. Basically, if I export my project and it looks good in both of those apps, then I can be pretty confident it's going to look good on YouTube and on the web and anywhere else. And I am less likely to get nasty surprises. Now my solution is, skip all that, and let's just worry about the last step and matching the footage in your Premiere Pro project window, but we'll do it in the timeline. We'll do it by adding an adjustment layer. And the best thing about doing it that way is you can actually keep checking on it as you go. And I just want to make sure that that color management is turned off. Yes, it is. And once we turn off our display color management and kind of start from scratch, we make an adjustment layer. And on that adjustment layer, all we're doing is reducing the gamma a little bit. And I've done this a few times and I've figured out that a saturation of 110 works well. So we'll go to one of my last examples that we talked about in the HLG part. So what you want to do is enable your adjustment layer, and you only enable this once you're ready to export. Otherwise you grade that as you like. So that's how you expect it to look, and you grade for that. And then when you're ready to export, enable your adjustment layer, don't have to do anything else, and then export as normal. So turn that back off again, because now with those two, with that example, exported, I can bring in these two VLCs and QuickTime to see how it actually compares to my project window. So that's why I want to turn the layer off. So in QuickTime, you'll see, as I expect, it's a bit more washed out. And in VLC, interestingly, if I just zoom in on the VLC, you can actually see it's a lot more, well, to me a lot more, it was a lot more saturated and darker, and particularly the saturation. And it's kind of good in a way. It made me realize that maybe my shot was too saturated, and it made me go back and desaturate it a bit. So that's a benefit in looking at both of these apps when you're exporting. So I went back and forth, and I decided that this was a good look for QuickTime, and I was also happy enough for it to possibly be this saturated and this contrasty if any of like Vimeo or YouTube decides to encode it that way. That once again, there's no nasty surprises. And I got that way by just trying a few different settings, and I thought 110 saturation was good, and just a little kiss down in gamma compensation using the curves here. And I wish there was a way to save this and share it. I don't know if there is, but what I definitely did was right-clicked and save that as a preset. So now, at least in all my projects, I'll always have that as my Lumetri Gamma Fix preset. So yeah, you look at the results, of course, and remember they won't be exact. It's just the way things are, unfortunately, and as some of the more professional colorists have mentioned on the Adobe forums, it's not Adobe's fault. It's just the way it's handling these color and these gammas differently per app. And so our best insurance against that is to get it somewhere in the middle of these two extremes. So that's why I like this example. It's a safe one. And it's much more intuitive, and you can see what you're going to get. Just remember to turn that on when you're exporting and turn it off when you're working. So to contradict myself a little bit, I will prefer the look of QuickTime if I had to choose. I want to make it look better in QuickTime first, since that's where I think the larger percentage of people will view my footage. I think most people will have QuickTime, not VLC. But like I said, these aren't the end mediums. These just represent to me two extremes of how it will look when representing the colors. That's a good way to put it, I guess. Usually QuickTime would look fine if it's a tiny bit desaturated, so I've creatively chosen to leave it like that. Which arguably may or may not be the same as doing the whole QuickTime compensation LUT. But then again, why do all those steps when you just have to add your own adjustment layer in the timeline? And like I said, no nasty surprises. And it's not ideal, I know, but until Adobe comes up with some way to kind of give us some more insurance about how it's going to look in different apps, then this is the best way around it. We split it down the middle. We find an acceptable balance, and then you're done. And I think I can leave it there. I think you understand. And if I missed anything, I'll put the other links to the other video and the Adobe link to the compensation LUT in the description below. But like I said, I think it does kick the can down the street a little bit. I wish they all just played better with each other, these programs. But this is enough info to make you confident again, because it was really giving me troubles when I would upload it and go away and do something and come back and realize that my YouTube looked nothing like how I expected it to. And no one wants that. Alright, well thanks for watching. That's all for this video. See you on the next one. That's enough.